Combine small town roots with business savvy, and you've got the Rural Rundown podcast. We're sharing our marketing and branding strategies, tips, and tricks that rural businesses can use to educate, inspire, and entertain their customers, and to help you make sales and hit profit goals. So what does it take to go from your mom is your only fan to famous in a small town? Tune in and listen up as we feature business owners and organizations that are doing big things in their community and creating opportunities for generations to come. Guys, I'm so excited for you to join us for today's episode. We're double checking our technical connection, making sure everything looks good.
Yep. Okay, yep, I see it. All right. Okay. Thanks for joining us. If you guys are here and you want to say hi, let us know you're here. Today we're going to be reviewing the Q3 RRD book club Shoe Dog.
I'm so excited for today. Rachel and I read this book. Rachel, this was your second time reading it for the book review. I listened to it on audiobook while I was traveling this summer for some client projects, and I was like, we should do a book club.
Yeah.
I'm so excited for today. Rachel and I read this book.
Sorry.
This was your second time reading it for the book review.
I have this on loud.
Listened to it.
There we go. I'm sorry about that.
I'm excited though, because this book was, I feel like this isn't a new book. This book has been out for quite a while. And so I feel like some people have already listened to it. Like I said, this was your second time listening to the book. And it really is, I was late to the game. I've heard people talk about it before, and then it came up in a previous episode where I talked about the logo process for Nike, and Rachel, you had mentioned Shoe Dog, and I was like, I think maybe it's time for me to read that book.
Yeah. Yes. I read it too, just like you. For a lot of people, like, you know, when you look at people's books to read or things they reference, I've seen it a lot and I didn't really know what it was. And then I downloaded it on my Audible app a couple years ago, and like just to have it because my credits were running out. So I was like, I gotta read that someday. And then I finally did. And I didn't physically read it. I listened to it too, but I really liked the audio version. Yeah. I think there was and I think this is such a surprising book in the way that it's a business book, but it's also like the story broken up in the decades that Bill Knight started, Nike. And I just think it's just told in such a cool way, but you get a lot out of it from like a business mentality, hiring, like building a team, building a business too. So I just really liked it.
Yeah, I did too. And I think Rachel knows this about me because we're college friends, but I'm obsessed sometimes with knowing people's life. Like I want to know everything about it. And I like dive into Wikipedia pages and I'm like, tell me about their backstory. Tell me about their history. And I'm just a nerd for biopics and like documentaries about people. So I loved that aspect of the book, really getting to, as much as people divulge about themselves, but really getting into Phil Knight's mind as he was building this empire that we now know as Nike. But really, I guess when you think about how it started, when you learn about how it started, you start to realize like it's just a company just like everybody else, and it took a long time for it to get to the empire that it is today, and it didn't happen overnight, and there were some like struggles that they went through. And I don't know if I think we'll dive into this a little bit when I like really start to like get crazy about the book, but when it first started, I don't know if I would have bought shoes from a traveling salesman, essentially, and they're just, shoes made in China. I don't know. It was a different time though, for sure. So who knows what that would be like versus the brand that we know today as this big corporation of Nike. Of course, it's like you trust Nike, but how long did it take them to be a trusted shoe?
Yeah, a long time. And one of the things that I like a lot about this book is it's like a ride through history.
Yes.
Things that you've heard about in school, but I wasn't alive for. So it's kind of cool to like look back and see how, like I said, this spans decades, and he goes into each one, not only from like a historical standpoint and what was going on, but also what's going on in his business and how things have changed so much. I mean, that's got to be such an interesting way to look back and see how business has changed and production and like just
Yeah.
what is expected of a company. You go from shoes, but now you're a brand. So I think that's a really cool illustration of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have never, full disclosure, I've never been in a book club before. So Rachel and I are kind of running this just like as we want to talk about the book. We really want to focus on three pieces that we kind of took away from the book and then the book overall. So, like you said, when you're talking about history, and how you kind of go through those, like Steve Prefontaine, I guess I knew who he was, but I didn't realize his like connection with Nike from the very start of it, you know? And then we look at the coach who was a partner of Nike, who was, you know, essentially just one of the first co-founders. When we look at what he was doing with the tennis shoe then, like he was creating polyurethane, and he was making these shoes with waffle irons to make the grips on the bottom of the shoes, and so many strange things that today, you know, there was a story that Phil had remembered when he was a track athlete in Oregon, and his coach was like making this sports drink that later on was like, I realized now he was trying to make Gatorade. And I'm like, gosh, it blows my mind to think about a coach that's so like intuitive to what its players need, but then also to be so innovative and be like, okay, how can I create this thing for my athletes, but to have the like wherewithal to be like, this is how a shoe needs to grip, and I'm going to make it in a waffle iron. That was like crazy to me.
Yeah, like what was his name? I'm
Hmm.
blanking on his name right now. But he was like a practitioner through and through, like of what
Yeah.
he loved, which was running track. Like he was going to set up his runners with the best thing and try to get them to that next level every single time. And it was just, I don't know, I thought Bowerman, that's his name.
Yes.
Bowerman. So yeah, and he was just such an interesting character.
Yeah.
And I talk about this a little later, but I love the way that he describes each of the people that were on his team. And like it's like you get to know them. And I just think that's such a cool, you see like the little quirks and their personalities and what that all those type of personalities, skills, mindsets took to build this. And
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's just really very cool.
Yeah, I thought so too. And then as we start to watch Phil Knight move into this process of actually having a shoe company, we see a lot of dynamic between his family. And I think as business owners, we can run into that quite a bit, where it's like, whether it's your parents, family members, friends, whatever, it's hard to tell people sometimes that your big goals, your big dreams, or whatever they are, but then to be met with somebody who you're always kind of like seeking approval or validation from, to for them to like question it, or kind of you're met with a little bit of like hard-headedness. I loved right away when Phil Knight's mom bought the first pair of shoes, and that was just like so sweet and genuine to me that it was like, I don't know, it was very cool to like see that somebody cared right away, even though he was what some people would probably be like, you know, like a little hippie. Like this guy left, moved to Hawaii for a while, then he like traveled through Asia and did all this stuff. I still feel like today even people are like, so what do you do? And I think maybe I related to that a little bit because that's how my life has been recently, where I just travel around. People are like, so you live in a trailer, and I'm like, well, yeah, we used to, but it wasn't like we were living, you know, a carny life. Like we were living like a pretty good life in a trailer. And I think people find themselves in different ways, and their businesses start in different ways. So it was really cool to see Phil have that validation from his mom, like right from the start. I think that was really touching.
Yes, I will go through some more of the quotes that I like the most, but one of the quotes at the end of the book is he reflects on that relationship with his mom and he says
Yeah.
mothers are our first coaches. And I don't know. I think like it makes me like weepy because I would think of my son and all that stuff. But then I
Yeah.
think of my mom too, and just those mom like relationships that we do have in our lives. A lot of times that does give us like the courage to start, or like you said, the validation. And she did that for him when she bought those shoes. And I just, yeah, I love that too.
Yeah. I think the courage to start is like such a big thing. Um, and then we see, you know, like Phil's either has this trunk full of shoes, or he had all of these boxes kind of delivered to his house, and really kind of the mountain of overwhelm that kind of comes with that. And I was like, okay, now how am I going to sell all these shoes? And like, what am I going to do at this point? And seeing him work through that process was kind of cool. This is where we like get into the business stuff. And I don't know if it's just like me being like judgmental or if it's kind of like a outward reflection of like how I look at my business and like how I try to run my business. But when we move forward and we see that Phil starts hiring employees and he gets Johnson as like one of his first employees, I this is where I start to like cringe and I'm like, what? Like I started to feel like Phil doesn't care about this business. He doesn't care if it succeeds or if it wins. Like, is he really the one like pushing the mountain, or is it Johnson that really starts like pushing the momentum of the shoe? Like, is Phil really in it, or is he just kind of like a coward that's gonna like let it go kind of thing? I guess is where I started to I was like angry and I was like, wait a minute, like this was your dream, this was your whole thing. You bought all these stupid shoes, now sell these dang things. I I really don't know how else to like categorize what I was like feeling besides like being a very judgmental person on somebody else's business. And I was like, oh, I don't know if this is just me being judgmental and seeing all the ways it could succeed, or knowing how successful Nike is now and being like, okay, wait a minute, where is like the disconnect? Who really made this the empire that it is? Or if it's like me myself being like, I should try harder in my business, or I should like do different things in my business. I'm not sure if that was like a reflection or a judgment.
That's a really interesting thought because I totally know what you're saying. And like when you read the book, you can see like he's going through so many different like transformations and like midlife crisis isn't the right word, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like he's kind of going through these things where he's trying to figure himself out. Is this going to survive? Can we do it? And like in a way, he had a constant with Johnson because
Yeah.
Johnson just was an overperformer and like cared so much
Yeah.
about the business. So it was hard to see him, I think, mistreated. I literally wrote down justice for Johnson because, like, you know, we'll get into this, but he like would write these letters. And that was another funny thing about this book, too, is like that's how they corresponded with each other, was they were writing each other letters.
Yeah.
And like Johnson wrote him like a letter every day and sometimes multiple a day, long letters telling him like all
Yeah.
the details and everything. And like Phil just could not handle the details. He couldn't even read it. And he couldn't even respond to Johnson. And Johnson was like pleading with him, like, please,
Yeah.
what did he say? Give me
Please send encouraging words.
yes. And he never do it. So it's
Yeah.
like, okay, you are, you know, a word I'm not going to say on here. Like, why can't you send him encouraging words? But
Say anything.
yeah, I don't know.
That blew my mind too. And I remember the like, please send encouraging words because if anybody knows the dynamic between my boyfriend and I actually worked for him in his company. And so I was like, you are just like this because he's not great at like giving praise. And so it's like a constant, it's a joke now where I'm like, please send encouraging words. And I've used it on my social media even a few times where I'm like, if you have encouraging words, like please pass them along. Because sometimes people need that, and sometimes people need that validation. And it was so sad to watch Johnson not get that. And then we see when Phil goes to California and Johnson has built this showroom for the shoes, and people are visiting the brick and mortar, like the first brick and mortar of Nike. And Phil like asked Johnson to move across the country. Johnson gets so hard on himself, looks at himself in the mirror and is like, you're a piece of garbage, blah, blah, blah. Of course, this is what your life is ending up to. And Phil just stands there. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, tell this guy he's doing a good job. He's your best employee you've got. The only person that's like selling shoes religiously built this brick and mortar, and you still can't say one nice thing about the guy. I like felt my respect like going down and down and down at these moments where I'm like, God, just say something nice to Johnson.
Yep. But like that you learn as you read through the book, like Phil just like that's not him. That's just not
Yep.
his leadership um ability. But going to Johnson, I do want to talk about him a little more because I feel like he was just so ahead of his time. Like he had respect and like attention to advertising before like
Yes.
and like Phil Knight didn't. And I get it. There's different hats that he's wearing. So like in his mind that wasn't important, but Johnson through and through was a sales guy, a marketing guy. Like
Yep.
when they talk about the stories of him, like I think like about the retention and sales strategy he had is something we could all adopt. Like the way he cared about his customers.
Yeah.
So to give context to the story, they were selling shoes mostly to like high school tracksters, kids running track, maybe in college too. So he like had a written index card of when these kids' birthdays were, if they had big track meets coming up, and he would actually send them letters too, ask them about the shoes, how their
Yeah.
track meets went, when their birthday was. And I mean, like, what a beautiful retention strategy right there. Like, he was personalized. And that's what we say all the time. Like, we need to make our marketing personalized to the people, respond to the people. If people actually are talking to you, like, talk back. And I think if you read that, that is something that I pulled out of there. It's just like a beautiful blueprint of what we can be doing. Even if it's not exactly selling shoes or products, you can translate that into services and other things as well.
Absolutely. And you can almost look at it like that was Johnson's email list before email was a thing, right? Where
Yeah.
he corresponded with the clients, he kind of followed up, made sure things were going well. And they were really still in the like development stages of these shoes at this point too. So his like um gosh, why can't I think of words right now? But basically his like market research that he was doing with these people was spot on too. And again, I think a little like before his time. I think that's like a great way to explain him. And I don't think I would have thought of that. I didn't think of that when I was reading the book.
Yeah. Yes.
um from there, from like at this point, I feel like we're moving through the book kind of chronologically, or like, you know, front to end of how the book was written as well. But they get, you know, eventually Nike turns into this thing. I think the other cool thing was like following the Olympics. I didn't realize how closely tied Nike was with the Olympics from the very start and from the very beginning of things. But I think, you know, that's like part of the coaching thing that was going on too. Steve Fontaine, when he became an athlete, the sponsored athlete for Nike, you know, he was a huge part of the Olympics. So that was really cool to like hear that history from another side, and like to hear their involvement in such a piece of history that many people know. Thousands of, you know, hundreds of thousands of people watch the Olympics every year. But to see like a small company, like that had to have been such a huge, like, uplifting part, right? Like everybody celebrates their wins. Like I celebrate wins when I get to that point, but if I was at the dang Olympics, like I would be losing it. Like I'd be like, dude, this is it, right? Like we've made it. And it's funny to like see now where Nike is versus like where it was then, to be like it wasn't even close to how big they were going to get or how things were going to blow up for them.
Yeah.
So it's crazy like reflecting on it backwards, but hearing the history forwards, if that makes sense.
Yes. And just the influence too of like athletes and Olympians in that day. I mean, obviously they're still very influential right now, but like
Yeah.
I feel like there's more space for like obviously influencers to be on social and access to them. But in those times, if you saw a picture, they talked about on the news, there was when they got into NBA players' feet on NBA players' feet, like his dad was like, "Oh, I saw that these big NBA players are wearing your shoes," and that was like the moment where his dad like respected what he was doing. But there was all this stuff before then, and then how that could just like take off in sales too. But it was like all this buildup of, you know, like not little people, but non-influential people, and then it took off once it hit the mainstream market too.
Yeah, I think that was such an interesting fact too. Like, so yeah, his dad starts believing in him, and then kind of becomes one of Phil's biggest cheerleaders as well. You know, but he gets to a point where the branding like really matters, and I think that's interesting too, because when we first learn about Nike, it's Blue Ribbon shoes or Blue Ribbon,
Sports.
like, yeah, yeah, Blue Ribbon Sports. So like that's the company that it's working underneath of, and then like eventually the Nike becomes a shoe that they offer. They have the Cortez, the Nike, the other things, and then it becomes like the full brand. And we walk into the branding piece of it, which we've shared about on here before, but I think was so interesting to hear how the logo came about. Like it was an arts student just in college that Phil, you know, met through his wife, right? It was a friend of his wife's that built their logo, and then she did it for $35 and she came up with this swoosh, and everybody, when they were like trying to figure out what this was, a swoosh was not the first word that like came to mind. So it was interesting to see again like the inception of this brand that we now know as such a huge corporation, such a huge company that plays a role in so many people's lives. Like I probably have 4 pairs of Nike shoes downstairs. And to think about how it got branded is so interesting. We talk about Phil's dad seeing it on the court too. Like, then we learn about brand positioning, right? And like how important it is that, you know, a Nike swoosh is on the side of the shoe, or we talk about people's clothing, how that brand is on the front versus the back, because what side of people do you see the most? I think that was like an interesting kind of like, as much as Phil Knight didn't believe, not that he didn't believe, but he didn't care about advertising, he didn't care about branding, he didn't, that wasn't like his first instinct in business. It's interesting how many times it kind of like came into the book or snaked its way in to be like, it was all meant to be kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think that's so true with the branding side of it, because it just it changed everything for them once they
Yeah.
they came into their own. And there was a lot of legal things and things that made them kind of have to do that, but it was like a blessing that they finally got that, and then it was able to transform into something different. So I think that is a cool little thing too, is there was a lot of like times where he thought he was going to be out of business, or like legally the bank wouldn't give him money. He was getting in that big lawsuit with Onitsuka, who was like the first manufacturer he worked with in Japan. Like there's a lot of things that we're kind of skimming over, but it like all brought them to this point where they had to go forward and become the brand Nike. And that's, yeah, I don't know. It's just very, there's so much more than just a logo. And this is
Yes.
a successful business. So,
Well, it's so interesting too to like, obviously like these were different times, right? But $35 for a logo that they used for a shoe, and like really it was kind of like the pinnacle of like getting these shoes out there and really kind of like owning the brand, because before this like the Blue Ribbon name was just kind of like a name he used. And when he first went to China, the first time that he went to Japan, the first time he met with anybody, a manufacturer to build these shoes, he made it up. It wasn't even like a real business at this time. It was just like a thing he made up in his mind. So I think that's just something that people can learn from today too, to be like, if you have a business idea, like just get it out there, just start with something. Like starting is better than never starting at all. You know, we talk about like done is better than perfect. But then he gets to this point too where it's like, okay, well, it's just a logo, it's just a swoosh, it was just the word Nike, but now it's evolved into something much bigger. And I think we see that as things grow and evolve, like that's where there's room to grow and evolve too. Like I think people have this misconception when I talk about branding and how I don't design just logos, but I do a full brand for people, that it's like, well, that's too big of an investment, or that's like too much from a business right now. And for some people it might be, but for other people it's like, this is what sets you up for success, you know, in the long run. This is something where it's like, it's not just the name Blue Ribbon Sports, or it's not just that you put on, but it's Nike. It's a Nike swoosh. It's like, that's the difference behind it. So I think that was really cool to like watch that grow and evolve as well. And to think about people in their different phases of business and their different parts of life, which like I said, everybody goes through, but to really see like, okay, like Nike as a brand, Blue Ribbon Sports was the name of a business.
yeah, you're right. It could just be the takeoff point,
Yeah.
investing into something like that. Kind of the one thing, I don't know if you're ready to move into this part. I just wanted to talk about the employee aspect and how he kind of built a team. Previously already said, like, I really loved seeing the camaraderie and the personalities that he built. But I also noticed that like the people that he talked about the most were people who bought in and believed in what he was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that was just, it's more than just a job. It became family, like a family there for them at Nike. So I thought that was, I mean, there's more to just having a team and hiring people. It's treating them to what they were good at. Because I think he talked about that too. He had some people who were like originally hired as lawyers, but then they turned out to be really good negotiators and working with
Yep.
sponsorships. And that one guy, I think the story was so funny that when Nike was going to move into like clothing, he hired him. And then it like turned out he had no style or like eye for
Yeah.
it at all. And then he moved him into accounting. But I think those stories show like that's kind of a natural process too in hiring and learning about people, their skills, where they should be. So I thought that was really neat. What did you have any like takeaways from all that part of the book?
Yeah, how people work together too, right? Because like it was Johnson and somebody else that like butted heads so badly and they couldn't be put separate places. So like at one point they were even on like different like eastern and western seaboards, like put a whole nation between them because they couldn't get along and they couldn't work together. I think that was really interesting too. So yeah, like for other places where Phil I will straight up say failed with his employees, like with, you know, giving encouraging words when Johnson so badly needed that. Um, Places where he failed, other times he did succeed, and other times he did like really pay attention to people and kind of like hone in on how the process was working and what worked and what didn't work. You know, as we get closer to the end of the book, you talked about how with Onitsuka, how they went through that lawsuit and stuff was happening as they moved into a different manufacturer. And then they eventually worked with like a different bank. They had a lot of troubles with banks. And they hired a prior coworker of Phil's who was a lawyer, but then really kind of turned out to be like a drunkard and caused some issues when they went to meetings overseas. So again, like seeing people's weaknesses, seeing their strengths, I think Phil Knight did an excellent job of observing his employees, and not even employees at that point. Like at this point, they're all like the founders or the board members of this business, and then how they work together too when when I think they were members of Onitsuka who came to came to the offices of Nike, and it was like really distracting them so that they could figure out what was going on and kind of navigate this, you know, issue that they were in. It was really cool to see each person's strengths kind of work then and how they came together to work together too.
Yeah, he definitely had trust, I feel like, in those people that were his, the backbone of the company. So I
Yeah.
thought that was really cool. And they had like a spirit. And
Yes.
I think everybody he hired had I wrote this down. I'm gonna look at it. At the beginning of the book, I think he talked about one of the things that he like thought was missing in his life. I could have this wrong, was like the need to like play. So like thinking back to when he was competing as a runner, like
Yeah.
like an athlete in competition, that feeling is something that he wanted back in his life, or like, and building this business brought that to him. And I think all of the people he hired obviously had a passion, most of them had a passion for running and athletics too, but they
Yeah.
had that same mentality of that competitiveness to like build something that was going to be something.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a few people watching, so anytime you guys want to chime in with what we're talking about and offer your own commentary, we would love to like hear that and kind of like chat back and forth with you. This is like a live recording that we will use for our podcast episode, which will come out in 2 weeks. If you want to swing back later and listen to the episode and you have to leave, or if you just want to like chime in with your own comments, we're here for it. This is like where I start to like nerd out in the book too, so we can get a little overboard. So leave your comments. We will definitely like interact with you and share your insights as well. I think what you're talking about when you're talking about Phil too, and um, we talked about the employee that he hired who to handle the fashion, and then it was like this guy had no fashion sense at all. Phil goes through this little piece of life where he starts to get overweight and starts to notice like I'm the head of this running company, but like I'm not running anymore and I'm out of shape, and like who's going to kind of like take me seriously, which is something that I feel like I resonate with so well, especially being when we did Ollie's Images, we were living in arenas, basically we're eating concession stand food all the time. I was like, this sucks and this doesn't work. So I think it was really interesting to be like how often people can put business, especially when we're business owners, how we can put it above everything else in our entire life. You know, even before we got on this call, Rachel, I'm like, well, I've just been sitting here at my desk since 7:30, and I just got up to go to the bathroom before we started, and it's like it can consume our entire life. It can kind of like come to that, and we saw that with Phil too, even before it became a huge corporation. And maybe that's when it gets easier too, when we start offloading things to people, we start hiring more people, and it's like, okay, now I can become kind of like a manager of this rather than like in the business every day. But I thought that was an interesting journey that he had shared with us, especially, being the head of a fitness and running company, essentially an athletics company, and then being like taking a reflection on your life to be like, do I fit the brand that I, am running or
Yeah.
that I've created? That was interesting.
I think it fits into like there are seasons that we all go through, and sometimes you
Yeah.
have your head down so hard into this business that you don't even realize what's happening over here because you have blinders on.
Yeah.
So I mean, it can be like a good and a bad thing. Um, One of the quotes I pulled that I think fits into this when you said about like when you become more of a manager or like delegating, and that's something that I know where we talk a lot of both about too, is how can we delegate. He quoted, "Don't tell people how to do things. Tell them what to do and let them surprise you with their results."
Yep.
I thought that was really good, but it's also very hard for me to like let go. But there's wisdom in that quote, I think, on
Yeah.
how to let other people have the spin on it, and it's probably better than what you thought it was you were going to do anyways. So
Yeah. Well, I think as creative business owners too, it's like I've tried that. I recently hired a junior designer and I'm like, listen, this is what I need for the end result. This is what mine looked like. Like, can you just do it? And she was like, yeah, like I'll figure it out. And I'm like, perfect. That's what I need. Cause like sometimes I don't have time to like tell you how to do things too. And I think I've realized that with people too. Like I can do a screen record and I can tell you exactly how to do it. Or I could just say like, hey, can you do this? And like, I don't need to tell you all the details. Like just kind of like get it done. So I think it's like that's an interesting quote. It's interesting that it like came from Phil, like we said, when he was so bad at managing people at times. But then to have that insight to be like, you don't have to tell them like how to do it. Just tell them what to do and like let them surprise you of how they do it. I feel like I'm kind of the opposite where I'm like, can you just do this? Like, and
mhm.
then figure it out. Like, I don't want to answer your questions. I don't have time to answer your questions. Like, just do this.
But that was his mentality and leadership style too, was very offhand. Like
Yeah.
he wanted people just to do it. So and like
Yeah.
not need too much, but there I think there's a give and take depending on who the people
Yeah.
you hire too. So it just depends on the person, I think, and creating, like we said before, that trust even with them to try it themselves. So
Absolutely. Jennifer, my mom, she says handing over control is hard to do, but they may come up with something better than you originally planned. Johnson was a perfect example of that, and I completely agree. Like when we look at Johnson creating a whole brick and mortar store for Nike without even like being asked to do so, and was like, "Hey, Phil, by the way, like now we have a store." It's like Phil couldn't have asked for a better employee, and he never said thank you. It still drives me crazy.
I laugh too that they talk about how Johnson was like taking, like he was in the pictures of the shoes that he would run in the newsprint or like tried to take pictures of the shoes. And I'm laughing because it's like, oh, that's funny. But like he was going for it. I just think that's somebody you need. Like that's such a good personality trait when you're going to be working for someone or with someone, is just to be, what's the word I'm looking for? I say it all the time, but what I'm trying to say is they're like willing to just try and go find out things that kind of
Yeah, kind of like a self-starter.
mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like when I think about Johnson, like at times I laugh because like maybe it would have driven me crazy to be like, well, why are you just running ads? Like you're just like, who said that you could run an ad? But at the same time, like he really took this business and made it his own, which I think makes great employees, right? When they care so much about the business and they care so much about what they're trying to promote that they're like, I'll spend all my time on it. I'll spend all my money on it. I have these great ideas. And like Johnson saw early on, like Phil's not going to give him encouraging words. He's also not going to like tell him that he can't do things. Like Phil won't even write back. So Johnson might as well just be running his own company. So I think that was really cool to see Johnson later on then become such an integral part of the business and of the company as it grew and grew. So um, I'm glad that Phil never got rid of him.
Yeah, me too. Okay.
I think when we watch Nike grow, when we get towards the end of the book, is when I got emotional. I really did. I was just like, I was nearly in tears and I'm like, holy crap. Like they did it. They get to this point, we haven't talked about Penny really at all, who
Mhm.
is Phil's wife, who was really there through a lot of it. She was a secretary in the business when they were like Blue Ribbon, and they just had this crappy little office. And they had two kids that Penny raised, and she does her needlepoint, right? Isn't that what she does when they sit in their living room together? So Phil talks about Penny quite a bit and the role that she kind of had. And then we see them once Nike is finally doing good, they decide to go public with the company, which was a really big thing for them and for all of the employees at Nike to get to that point. And then it was like Johnson's or not Johnson. Who was the employee that was in a wheelchair?
Waddell. I think it was
Yes,
Waddell.
Waddell, who was a track athlete and then got hurt, and now this kid's in a wheelchair. Um, Oh, my mom mentioned they have 3 kids. They have a daughter that's not mentioned in the book. See, my mom must be a Wikipedia nerd too.
Yeah, I looked that up too, Jen. I was like, why?
That's interesting. When we look at Waddell, who again, this guy was in a wheelchair working for a sports company. Phil talked about that dynamic a little bit and how like interesting it must be for this guy to sell running shoes and to wear running shoes, and he's paralyzed, and to be in a wheelchair. Waddell's parents, when Phil kind of was like going through a rough time in the very start of the business, Waddell's parents were the first people to kind of like buy into the company or to loan some money to Phil Knight. And then we see later when the company goes public that they become like millionaires overnight. Waddell has to explain that to his parents and kind of like how that works. I was like, oh God, pulling at the heartstrings. Like everything became so emotional at the end of the book, and it's like, gosh, everybody was just believed in this guy. They believed in the brand. They really wanted to like see it succeed. Waddell's parents were such champions for their own son that they invested in this company that he was part of. And each person kind of like gets their own piece of the pie. We talk about the logo designer who designed a logo for $35. She gets, I think she got 35 shares of the company or something weird, which is millions of dollars now. And it was just really cool to kind of like see it all come together and see it all be like, this is how it happens, this is how it works. And it was kind of a scary moment that Phil walks us through, like going public and is like, is this really the right move? And again, kind of like releasing a little bit of your business, like that's hard as a business owner to release that stuff, um and to take that step. That can definitely be scary, but you know through every roadblock or every scary thing that comes up, every time you make it through, that leaves somebody on the backside. So every hurdle that you can jump, you're always like leaving businesses behind. You're always getting to the next spot. And I think that's like, talk about track, talk about running shoes and jumping those hurdles. That's exactly what Nike did. So it was really cool to learn all of that.
Yeah, one of my favorite memories with Penny and Waddell, since you mentioned both of them, was actually at the beginning of the business when Phil found out that neither of them was cashing their paychecks.
Yeah.
Like that made me want to
Leaving
cry.
them in their office drawers and Phil found all of their checks. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's the people that were surrounding him and working for him, like it's beautiful. Like the way they were and the way they thought and the way they were behind him is just something like we all hope to
Yeah.
have. I think the one of the last things you said though was at the end of the book, you do kind of get a sense that Phil was fighting between he spent so much time building this business where it was the time with
Yeah.
his sons and his family. And I think that was, I don't think he ever says he regretted it, but I could like feel like there was definitely a concern there. Like, should have I been here more? And I think that's something we all
Yeah.
probably struggle with too, is that balance.
Yeah, I absolutely, again, like I feel like I can speak to this, like living so far away from family and living so far away from home. It's like, what do you put first, right? Like we're all trying to build these careers, we're all trying to build these businesses, and that's what society like tells you you're supposed to do, but at what cost, right? Like have we lost sight of like what the actual cost is? Like, are we really all supposed to be like neglecting our families and putting all of this so much first, or is there happiness and fulfillment in being with your families? um I don't know, it's interesting. I think about, like, my dad has always told me this too, like adventure, right? Like, I'm obviously the adventure type, or looking for something new in life. And my dad always says, like, his adventure was just to have a family and have kids and to be a dad. That's what he always wanted to do. That was his adventure. And it's like, gosh, people's goals are so different from others. And so, like, who are we to like say, well, you didn't live a full life because you didn't build a multi-million dollar business like Nike? But Phil's kind of like on the opposite side of it, where he's like, did I have a full life? Because he ends up losing one of his sons dies. And it's like, did I have a full life? Did I do everything I could to be a good dad? Or was he kind of like his own dad who didn't send very many encouraging words? So yeah, that was definitely an emotional part of the book.
Yes. Yeah.
um the other thing, I think, when we're like at this point in the book, which I was like mind blown, was Phil and Penny go to the movie theater, and they're just like, after the movie's done, they're kind of like in the lobby of the theater, and they run into Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, who are like at the theater together, and they're just chatting, and they're like, oh, hey, Phil, and like chat with Phil and Penny. And Phil's like, these are the richest men, the most wealthy men alive, and they're just chatting with me. And it was kind of like interesting to be like, I guess I kept feeling like that gave a little insight to be like, how money doesn't change you. Like, don't let the money change you, kind of thing, or don't let the fame change you. Where like they're all just at the movie theater. They're at the local movie theater catching an afternoon matinee, and they're all worth millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That was kind of like a funny thing for me.
Yeah, first of all, where is this movie theater? I'm just kidding.
Right.
Second, though, along that line is something I kind of forgot. The way Phil talks about himself throughout the entire book is you would never have guessed he is the way he speaks of himself, that he is the founder of Nike. Like he describes himself as shy. He didn't know how to negotiate. He was pretty unsure of himself throughout the whole thing, but like look where he came. And I think I find encouragement in that, because sometimes I think when we think like, who's a business owner, what does that personality like, or what do you have to act like? You just have to be yourself. And I think he was himself through and through, and it got him, he was successful. So I think sometimes we just look, like you said, oh, this is what you think these people are like, but really they're just normal people who have put in the work, had a dream, and you made it happen. So
yeah, I totally agree. Okay, so I'm just double checking my notes. The other thing that we look at is like, it was funny because my mom and I chatted about this the other day right before she finished the book, so she didn't get to the emotional part of it yet. She was like, it's been weird to hear about how Nike just wasn't built overnight. And I was like, no, it wasn't. They went through so much. There were a lot of different things that they had to go through, hurdles that they had to jump to get to where they are now. And there was some heartbreak and there was some loss along the way, like Steve Prefontaine, even, he died in a car crash when he was one of their first sponsored athletes. They talk about the Olympics when there was that attack on the Olympic Village. They talk about all the lawsuits and the different things they went through with the banks. Like, it was not a very clear and easy path for this business to be built. And I think was the coolest thing about it, to be like, when it comes full circle at the end, because of what we know Nike as today, maybe that's why it was so emotional for me to be like, are you kidding me? Like, what? Like, this is how it happened, and this is how, like, it all came together, and you just walked this journey. That's what's so cool about this book, is that, like, you and I have been talking a lot about business and how our review has focused a lot on business and how we look at our life as business owners. But this was a book about Phil Knight's life, and it was written as such, that it was such a journey, and it was a story, and it was a full path that you're walking with this person in their life. And in many times it was told so beautifully as a story that you forget that it's like, this was real life, like, it can be fabricated, it could be whatever type of story, but to be like, this is real life, this is how this business was built. I think that was like the coolest part of this book.
I do too. I mean, like I said, it's surprising. It was a surprising read when you think like, oh, this is a recommended business book to read. You think it's going to be more, I
Yeah.
don't know, like tips and no,
Yeah.
it was the story of his life. And I think that's what made it so enjoyable. I actually, when I first started listening to the first time on Audible, I was kind of like, this is weird. But then I like was like, okay, keep listening. And then I got more and more into it. And I mean, I'd probably listen to it again.
Yeah,
I mean, I really would.
definitely.
So I think there's just so much you can pull out and connect to when it's like intimate. Cause like you said, it's like him, his
Yeah.
life.
Yep. And I think too, like you said, the book is so interesting when it starts because it starts with him going on a run. Like he's lacing up his shoes, he's going for a run, he's talking about running in the rain and like Oregon and how proud he is to like be from Oregon. And I think that was right from the start. You're just taken on this journey, and it is very much like a story well told and a story well written. I think the like very last part of the book, you know, when he's kind of like reminiscing on his life and how it all works, and he brings it full circle to like start writing the book, which is like chef's kiss, is so perfect. But he's talking about, he went into like the Nike facility or the Nike like compound where all their corporate offices are and stuff, and he kind of like reflects on his journey. I feel like I'm getting emotional again. He reflects on his journey like through Asia, through, you know, when he started in Hawaii and he climbed all these mountains, he did all these different things, and the River Jordan, and then he has Michael Jordan as like his biggest athlete, and he talks about Kobe Bryant, and he talks about all these things that like so perfectly align, like Nike being the goddess, you know, like everything is just so perfect that you're like, is this coincidental or is this like mindfulness? You know, like we put our mind to the test. We really put ourselves out there in the universe. Is the universe giving back to us? Is that a big part of our business? And like, you know, running on intuition and building our businesses that way. I think that there's so much to be told about this. And as he reflects on that, I was just like, holy crap. Like you know, you can't help but just be like, holy crap.
Yeah, that's a really fun part of the book when he starts connecting those dots. And I think another thing he does throughout the book too is like shoe dog is a term for somebody who's like obsessed with the shoe and like the make of it and the build of it. And at first I think that's kind of confusing because you don't know what that is until he does explain it like later in the book. But throughout the whole book and his stories, he weaves in shoes into like his travels and how this
Yep.
has just been like the theme of his life and this passion of his life. And I think that is
Yeah.
just, it's beautiful. Like, I don't know if it's like you said, probably like reflection, looking back, he was able to see all this, but also putting those things out there too. It connects the
They
dots.
have to be. I mean, they have to be signs. I feel like that in my business too. And I always like remind myself, right? When it's like when you're getting to that hurdle and you're getting to that point and you're faced with like jumping over it or being like, gosh, like I just don't know what to do. Like there are signs out there that kind of like lead you and tell you you're going along the right way. And I just have to believe that that's what Phil felt along the way too. That there's just different things where it's like, this is it. Like this makes sense. This is meant to be kind of thing. You know, whether you call it a God thing or whatever you call it, like I do truly believe like the universe is out there, they're watching, they're testing you sometimes, but you'll always know when it's making sense.
Yeah.
That is basically what I have to say about the book. If you can't tell, I really, really enjoyed it. I, I do. I was just so emotional when I finished the book. I started the book on my own. I was traveling for projects. When I finished the book, Oli was with me and he had already read the book too. And so I could like see him watching me to like see my reaction. And I was like, I'm gonna cry. Like this is full on like emotional for me.
Yeah, I think I like was talking to you that day where you're like, I'm finishing it and I'm crying and I'm like, it's good, I know. So that was kind of the reason we picked this as our first book. So if you did listen to it with us or you will be listening to it eventually, let us know what you think. I'd love to know if you got anything out of it. And we're just really excited
Yeah.
to be kind of having our own book club. Like you said, I've never been in a book club either, so I've always wanted to be in one. So I think this keeps me accountable. And Brennan, do you kind of want to tell them about what's going to be up for Q4, our next book?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, I can't believe the end of this week. We're in our fourth quarter of the year. So we really like to keep this trend. We want to read one book a quarter. So, in December, we will have our next book review. And the book we will be reading is Atomic Habits, which, Rach, have you read before, right? You
I
read it once?
have. Yes.
I have not. It's been sitting on our bookshelf. Oli has read it on audiobook, and I'm like, I'm gonna do it. I've been like keen to different pieces of the book, but I'm really excited to dive into it. And we will give you guys a Amazon link if you want to find that book on audiobook or hardcover. I think I'm gonna do hardcover this time. Rachel, what are you doing?
Yeah, so I rarely actually have time, I feel like, to read books hardcover, but I did last year. That's when I read it for the first time, and I'm going to read it on hardcover
Okay.
again. And I liked it because I like reading it hardcover this time. But yes, it's by James Clear. Like you said, we'll put the links everywhere for you so you guys can do it with us.
Yeah, absolutely. My mom just commented again. She said it was a journey of faith on many levels for Phil when she's talking about Shoe Dog, as we look at the ending of that book. And I agree. I think yeah, so many levels. We could dive right back into it to be trusting himself, trusting his employees, all of it. But yeah, definitely. So we really enjoyed Shoe Dog. If you haven't read the book, my sister texted me and she's like, I've not read the book, but I'm watching your Facebook Live. Definitely read it. We loved it. And audiobook makes things so easy. When that's what Oli and I do when we travel, when we drive, we always pick a new audiobook. So it's definitely easy to read a lot of books in a short amount of time. So yeah, for Q4, Atomic Habits, I think it's a great book to end the year with too, for a lot of people that do the New Year's resolution. I think it's a great way to end our last 90 days of 2021 with a book about habits and building good habits. Especially I feel like I'm kind of in a season of changing my business, growing my business. I feel like Rach, you might be here too, because we've talked a lot lately about hiring VAs and adding people to our teams. So I think this is gonna be a good book.
Yes, I'm really excited. Like I said, I have read it before, but I know I can get so much out of it again because we're constantly trying to develop new habits, or things have changed in our lives. So we need to figure out what's a good process. And the book really walks through all of it really well. So I'm very excited. One last little plug. We had a new podcast episode launched today. It's with Jordan Tierney. She is Miss Rodeo. Is it Miss? How do I say is that it?
Miss Rodeo America.
Yes. So make sure you go listen to that too, because that was a really good conversation we had with her, and it was really fun to speak with her. So we think you'll like it.
It was. That was such a good conversation with Jordan. For anybody that's still on here and watching, so that episode dropped at 11 a.m. today. So Central Time. If you haven't listened to it yet, definitely do it. If you haven't noticed, we've transitioned to doing bi-weekly episodes. So next week will be no episode. The following week will be the recording of this episode that we did here today on Facebook Live, with our book review from Shoe Dog. So today's episode that released with Jordan was, oh God, it was so good. When I edited it yesterday, I was like, gosh, this was still a good conversation. At one point, I'm like, Jordan, you're the coolest person ever. To have the insight that she does and to be in the position she is, and to have this, she held the crown of Miss Rodeo America for 2 years because of the pandemic we saw in 2020. So it's really cool to talk with her and to listen to her. And her reign is up this year. In December, she'll be in Vegas and hand over that crown during the NFR. So yeah, a good episode. She talks a lot about your why and how that kind of leads you in business and what you're doing. And she talked about sharing a piece of your life with people. We talked a lot about how she kind of lives in a little slice of heaven in a very remote part of South Dakota, and how she welcomes in all of her followers on the Miss Rodeo America page, which is 30,000 people, how she welcomes them in and kind of shows them her life. So I think she had a lot of really good things to say.
Yes, make sure you go listen to it.
Yeah, absolutely. One more comment here on our Facebook Live. Takeaways. My mom says, what do you know? When faced with uncertainty, looking for a direction, ask that probing question over and over. Yeah. I think that's a cool takeaway too.
Yeah.
I still like struggle with Phil Knight a little bit, where I'm like, should have given the encouraging words. But other than that, like, I mean, obviously the guy knew what he was doing. He built this huge company. At the same time, it's like,
final takeaway maybe from us will be, if someone asks you for encouraging words, maybe just try to send one. If you can't do two, send one. Somebody needs one.
Maybe Rachel and I both have like a love language of words of affirmation. I don't know.
I love it.
But I do feel very deeply about that.
Okay, well, thanks everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. I don't know, do you have anything else final, or are we wrapping up?
That's all I have. I hope you guys will join us for the book club in Q4. I think Atomic Habits is going to be a great book. Again, that's by James Clear, and we will drop a link. You can always go to our Facebook page and our episode notes, and we have an option in there for you to leave a voice memo. You can also visit the page on our website that is all about our book club. So it talks about our books that we've listened to and stuff that's going. My mom said he did often come off like not a great person, a great human. That part was a disappointment, but I think he was such a good human, like Rachel talked about, where he was like so shy. I'm like, I really do believe that. I think he was a good human, and I think people's childhoods have a lot to do with like who they are as adults. So I think we see a major reflection of Phil's dad and himself, especially as a business owner.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like too, it's hard to build a team like that loves you if you're not, like,
yeah,
if they don't sense.
Yeah, you had to have been a good human.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had to get what you're saying, Jen, because sometimes you're reading it, it's like, what are you doing? From an outside perspective, it's easy to say, what are you doing? But I'm sure people could look at my life and say the same thing. So,
yeah. Yeah. I think that was like the cool thing about the audiobook too, especially when I was traveling alone, that I like outwardly talking and I'm like, God, send Johnson good words. I was really upset.
For Johnson. That's what that will be.
Justice for Johnson. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I look forward to doing this again in Q4.
Yeah. See you guys. Have a good day. Bye.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Rural Rundown podcast.
Thanks for listening. You can always find us on social media at the Rural Rundown.
And if you really liked this episode, we would totally love it if you gave us a review and gave us a little rating.
It would mean so much to us. And for more small town roots and business savvy, catch us on the next one.